Yeah, hi, blessings, welcome. What do you do when your religion dies? What do you do when everything that you had believed in starts to fall apart? Well, I can't really tell you what to do. I can't make any recommendations, but I can tell you what I did, what I went through. And this is, I don't know, 25, 30 years ago, um, 25, 26 years ago. I went through, I was a very devout um, believer in the religion that I was in, and it was all Bible based, um, and it was kind of a mix between, I guess, basic Christianity um, and kind of a Hebrew Israelite kind of morphing, you know, merging rather together with. It's really kind of hard to describe, but it was a Bible based, Torah based, Hebrew Israelitish way of believing and living. And I really did live according to what I believed. Every aspect of my life revolved around my beliefs, and that's really what I was after. Um, so, so anyway, one day it came along that I was reading the Bible, studying, which was my habit to do, and I was part of a fellowship that that has started for me when I was in New York. And at this point that I'm speaking of now, I was living in Missouri. And what happened was, one day I'm reading, studying the Bible, and I'm reading this passage about the dedication of the Second Temple by Solomon. And it was, and King Solomon had set aside kind of a celebration observance of 8 days for the rededication of the rebuilding of the rededication of the temple as a result of its rebuilding. And I came across a passage where uh, it said that so many animals had been uh, sacrificed, and it was like 140, 150,000. It was an enormous number of animals, according to this story. Okay, which I no longer believe to be true. All right. Um, and you can do with that what you will. If you think I'm evil, so be it. If you think I'm great, so be it. I'm neither. Okay. This is just me talking about what I believe. And so, anyway, when I read that passage, and it was over an 8 day period that these, 100,000 plus animals had been sacrificed, and all kinds of animals. So there were goats and sheep and rams and I mean all kinds of animals. And when they sacrificed animals in these stories, there was a very specific way that they had to do it. They would split the animal, and then they would take out certain organs and put those organs, whether it's the liver or the heart or the entrails, and put them on the altar of burnt offerings. And there was all this elaborate ritual that went with that, and these very specific sequences. And so I at, would I did the math because I liked to get into the specifics, kind of drill down through my imagination into the specifics of these stories. And so I did the math, and also they had sacrificed these animals only just certain number, only during certain hours of the day. Okay, and so it was between like the third hour and the ninth hour of and whatever time of year it was, I forget now. And this was supposed to have been in Jerusalem, and yada yada yada. Anyway, so I did the math, and I divided 140, 150,000 animals sacrificed over an 8 day period, and they would have had to have been sacrificing at a rate of like, and I forget now because this is 25 years ago, but it was something like 4 animals per minute or something. And I saw that, I took out my calculator and I did the calculations. It was like 4 point something animals per minute, if I remember correctly. And I thought, you know, that's that doesn't seem feasible. It didn't seem possible. And anyway, long story short, I kept redoing the math, and I even like redid the math so that I had calculated as if they were sacrificing animals 24 hours a day, okay, for the 8 days. And still, the numbers were not working out. They were not sacrificing 24 hours per day. And, it was only during those specified hours, like I mentioned. But anyway, I did the math, and no matter how I did and redid the math, it did not work out. It was not possible for them to have sacrificed that many animals over an 8 day period. It just wasn't possible. And so I kept going over this, kept going over this, and I was wrestling with it. And I was married at the time, and my wife at the time was as devout as I was, but I didn't share it with her initially because it was really tripping me out. And so I remember I just sat with it, for I don't know, a couple of days in silence and going back, revisiting the math, and I could not work it out in my logical reasoning mind. And so I remember I called my mentor, Ben Danielle, and who was still in New York at the time. He's from Jamaica originally, but he was in New York, living in New York at the time. And I told him what I had come across. And at that point, I had come to the conclusion for myself before I called him that this could not be true. But yet, I was of the belief at the time that everything in the Bible, that the Bible was the literal word of God, and that it was infallible, as God is infallible, and that there was nothing in there that was untrue. It was all perfect and complete. That's what I was taught in the church growing up. So I called my mentor, Ben Daniel, and told him what I had come across, and I told him, I said, this can't be true. And he looked at it, and he says, man, he says, Sareed, he says, you got something here, man. And anyway, I'm not going to get into that conversation because that's not the point here. The point being that what happened was I came to the conclusion that this was not true. That something about it was not true. The numbers were not true. Something was not true in this infallible Word of God. And when I came to that conclusion within myself, my very next question was, if this is not true, then what else is not true in the Bible? And I'm not here to, cast a negative light on the Bible. If you're a Bible-believing member of, any church or religion, Christianity, whatever it may be, Judaism, I'm not here to convince you that the Bible is not true. That's not my point. I'm just sharing with you my process. Because, and the reason being that some of you might have gone through this process, might be going through this process, not specifically in connection with this particular passage in the Bible, which was, I think, in 2nd Chronicles. But just in general, overall, if you're going through this process or have gone through this process where the things that you once believed no longer hold true for you, that's what I'm sharing, is what I went through in my process. And so when I came to that conclusion, and the next question was, if this is not true, then what else is not true? I thought, man, and everything just started falling apart like a house of cards. And I went through some serious anguish. And I remember sharing it after some time with my wife at the time. And I remember she told me to pray and to fast and pray, that demons were, messing with my mind. And that's kind of what I was thinking at the time too, a little bit. But again, my logical reasoning mind was just like, no, this is just this is not true. This cannot be true. The math does not work out. There's no way to make it work. Period. End of story. That's it. Okay. So when the next question again arose, if this is not true, then what else is not true? I started looking at the Bible and reading it more critically. In other words, with critical thought. where before I read it just completely, without ever questioning anything. Everything was absolutely true. Now my question was, well, is this true? Is that true? What's going on here? And all of a sudden, my eyes started being opened to, you know, inherent differences, contradictions, if you will. And that had been brought up in my previous life in the church where, all seeming contradictions, there are no contradictions because there's an underlying a thread of truth that connects everything. So what appears on the surface to be contradictions are not contradictions. These are just challenges to your faith and yada, yada, yada. Anyway, so I went through a process that was hellish. It was really, really difficult, really difficult, because I started to question everything. I questioned the Bible. I questioned the whole idea of God as it was taught to me. I questioned, and everything just started falling apart where the things that once held true to my believing mind, to now my critically thinking, critically reasoning mind, they were not true, and I could not reconcile the true. I could not reconcile my believing mind with my critically thinking mind. And so I come to the conclusion that the Bible, whether because of the translations or whatever the case may have been, was not the infallible Word of God as I was once taught, and that whole belief system just collapsed for me. And here's the thing: because my whole identity was wrapped up in that faith, in that belief system, and because my whole identity and the way that I kind of placed myself in the world and in the universe and in relation to the God that I had grown up believing in, because my whole identity was wrapped up in that, my sense of self fell apart. And that's where it became really torture. My mind was tortured and tormented for months, for months. And I would pray and I would fast and pray and I would, just do all these things, And I even considered like just going back to the faith, going back to my old belief system, and and then just move on in life, and that's it, and forget about all this. However, once you're born, you cannot be unborn. Once you come out of the womb, you can't go back in. You cannot go back into the womb. It doesn't happen. It cannot happen. And so I knew then that there was no going back. But when I looked forward ahead of me, there was nothing to look forward to. It was all blank. It was all a void. And I was terrified because now the sense of self that I had built up through my faith over the years and decades of my life was no longer there. That sense of self had completely fallen apart. And I was terrified. I was terrified. I was terrified. And I went through anguish and horror and terror and, abject fear, the darkest fear that I imagine that I could possibly go through. I was going through it. And I would pray and I would seek and question and all these things and just, and there were no answers. There was no voice. There was no still small voice. There was nothing. There was just this, the old world behind me that had fallen apart. It was all, in ruins. And ahead of me, there was nothing. And what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And if you're going through this, I have some idea of what you're going through. If you have gone through this and you still haven't maybe settled on a way of being and operating that makes sense to you yet, I know what that feels like. I know what that feels like. If you're going through it, I have some idea of what you're going through. And I'm going to tell you that the process and the path is not easy. It's not simple, or maybe it could be. Maybe you can come to your conclusion. Maybe things can fall apart for you and you come to your conclusion and you just keep going and treading forward. And if that's the case, and you can do so with peace of mind and with confidence that everything will work out, and everything will work out if you continue searching within yourself. But if you can do that on your own and do that, rather simply, easily, good for you. That's awesome. That was not the case for me, and I imagine that for a lot of people, that's not going to be the case. Has not been the case, is not the case, and will not be the case. Especially the longer that we've grown up in the church system, in the officially sanctioned religious system, under officially sanctioned beliefs. If we've grown up that way, it's I have to imagine that it's not going to be an easy path for you. And if that's the case, then I implore you, stick with me here. I'm not your guide. I'm not your teacher. I'm not the answer. I don't have answers for you. That's not the case. But I'm going to be sharing. And through my sharing, maybe perhaps some lights within your own self will turn on for your own self. Not that my sharing, whatever I share, will be a light for you. No. But that through my questions and my questionings and through my experiences as I share with you, that your own light, your own internal light will turn on and will help you see your way through dark places. And yeah, it was torture. But here I am, decades later, fully intact, fully at peace, and I'm going to continue sharing about my process on that. Okay, because this is all in keeping with ultimately with what is my purpose in this world. And in my past few videos, I've been talking about when crisis happens, there's also opportunity. And one thing to ask yourself when you're going through the crisis of loss of job or loss of relationship, loss of identity, loss of your sense of self, is to ask, what is my purpose? There are many other questions that can be asked as well, just as valid, if not more. Your process is unique to you. I'm not going to interfere with that. And I don't really seek to impact your process or influence it in any way. Not at all. However, I'm going to share with you my process, and maybe perhaps through my sharing, um, your own internal light will turn on for you and help you see your way through. Because uh, my gifts are healing and teaching, right? Healing and teaching. And that's all I aim to do with Imago Spiritual Learning and Wellness, is to provide some measure of healing, which is really just simply restoration of balance, just like healing of the body is restoration of homeostasis, right? So that's restoration of balance. Homeostasis is balance. Well, that's all that really healing is, okay? And that ultimately is up to you. You have your own healing process within you. But I'm going to share with you mine so that I pray that it will be a help and a blessing to you of some kind. And teaching is also my gift, as evidenced by the 14 years that I've worked with youth in the educational system. And I went through a number of challenges with that as well, tremendous challenges. However, what is teaching? Teaching is learning. That's it. Whether you're teaching or whether you're the teacher or the student, you're learning either way. And learning heals the wounds of ignorance. And our greatest ignorance is about ourselves, what we are, and our makeup, and our true makeup. Okay? So that's all that I aim to do here. And if this resonates with you in some way, if you're going through this, if you know someone who's going through this, share this video with them. Give a like, give a thumbs up. I always felt funny about making that request. This is my first time ever saying that. Subscribe to the channel perhaps. Give me support, because my love, I'm going to share with you right now. I, I don't seek to be anything special for you. I am what I am for me, and that's it. And what I am for me, I seek to bring out for the good and the blessing of all. And that's really it. So, and with this channel, I would love to be able to do this full time. I would love to be able to do this full time and focus all of my effort and all of my contributions to this world through Imago Spiritual Learning and Wellness. So if you, give a thumbs up, if you give a like, if you subscribe, that would help me. tremendously. And also, I always include with every video a couple links in my description. There's a link to my book of poetry, mystical poetry, if you will. I want to be careful with that word mystical, but because I don't want to try to come off like I'm a mystic. That's not the case, but these come from places, and moments where I've had experiences. And also there's a link to Buddhafly.com. And Buddhafly.com, my original intention was to pronounce it butterfly, but some people also call it Buddhafly, and I like that. But yeah, Buddhafly is where I sell merchandise, kind of clothing, shirts, hoodies, and stuff with messages, and it's all about the messaging. That's all that it's about. It's all about the messaging. So um, yeah, my desire is to continue sharing, and I will continue through my sharing. Perhaps something beautiful will unfold for you, for me, for us, for all. Okay, so thank you so much for taking this time here at Imago Spiritual Learning and Wellness. And feel free to share this video with others, perhaps, who might be going through something. Okay. Um, and again, I don't have the answers for you. You are the answer for yourself. The answer lies within you. And my purpose is to point you to that which is within yourself, which is within you. Okay, no matter what religion you're in, whether you're Christian, Muslim, Jew, Hindu, Buddhist, no religion, atheist, whatever it may be, um, ultimately, this is just one individual speaking with another individual, and that's you. That's it. All right. So many blessings to you and to all that pertains to you. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon. All right. Stay blessed.